I'm delighted to be here today with Kaleb, also known as KJ on Twitter, um, who has developed a musical pattern visualizer. And so we've had some discussions on Twitter about music and how maybe those patterns are similar to the patterns in color or similar to other patterns that are showing up in the world. And so I thought it'd be fun to have KJ come on and talk about this app and maybe show us some of it. But before we get started, Kaleb, could you introduce yourself a little bit of your background and maybe where you live and what you do and what got you interested in developing this app?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me on, Karen. It's been a long time in the making. I'm sure we can kind of get into that if we want to, but yeah, so I don't know. I'm sure the audience has clocked on in the last few sentences that I'm a down Southian, or how do we call it? A down under? We don't actually really say that down here. Um yeah, I'm from Australia. I'm from Western Australia. And I'm like kind of tucked away in this isolated little corner of the world, which makes it hard to coordinate stuff like this with my wacky time zones and stuff. But yeah, I love it down here, and I've been here my whole life, and I have been a musician for my whole life that I can remember. I've been playing piano since I was very young, since we like got a keyboard in the house when I was like 2 or 3 years old or something. And I've always had a real keen interest in making and listening to and understanding music. Um, and so this project, which we'll go into the details, but it's the current kind of culmination of all my musical exploration and the ways in which I've sought to understand what's going on there. And the in some ways a bit of a remedy to some of the issues I had with the traditional methods of teaching music theory, which I'm sure a lot of students or ex-students can resonate with. And so, yeah, it's part of this kind of broader mission to fix music education, but that's still kind of a far off dream. And this is the inklings of that project kind of beginning for real, which is very exciting.
Well, so have you been involved in the academic side of music theory, or is this just through your own experience?
Yeah, so this is mainly like just my own kind of um hyper focused exploration of the topic, with a good deal of influence from traditional teaching. So I like I said, I took up piano as a very young kid, and I was very kind of self-taught at that point. I didn't really do many lessons or anything until mid to late primary school, where they didn't last very long because I wouldn't do the actual homework practice. I just want to figure out some song that I was listening to and not like learn how to read sheet music and all that. Who can be bothered? And so I kind of had this like interesting relationship with it where it was like my one true love, but I also couldn't really stand the like technicalities of it all. I just wanted to make music, right? And so especially with piano music where there's like multiple notes happening at the same time, up to 10 notes at once, and I just could never really still to this day I my weakest point as a musician is my reading skill. And so there's ways that that an evolution of this app that I've built could kind of help with that, but it's kind of at a lower level than that. It's trying to kind of explain just the fundamental patterns with the minimal necessary reference to the um like traditional terminology that's used to describe this stuff. um and so it kind of resonates with where I ended up going as a musician and my beginnings. And so I but I did end up going through like a proper traditional music course, like education through high school, which is when I picked up the trumpet, through like the music program that was run at our primary school and into the high school. Really, really great music program, like a pretty world class like primary and secondary school program in Bustleton, where I'm from. And it taught me a lot, and it was a lot less intimidating to read one note at a time instead of 12 notes at a time. And so I really I got a lot further with my like reading and theory through that leg of things, but still with piano as this kind of background first true love that I had, that I would tie things back to with the trumpet and all of that. And so then enjoyed all that through high school, but decided to go further after high school into tertiary education on music, and kind of on a whim, but in a semi-calculated way, I decided to do a jazz piano degree, which is where I thought I'd kind of get the most out of the tutoring and the theory and all that kind of side of things, which was really eye-opening. Like there was so much more complexity to like the jazz kind of side of things than I was getting in the basic kind of music program. And so it was kind of around that time that I like really was butting my head against trying to formalize and structure and understand all of these things that were being thrown at me during my jazz degree. And so it was 2022 when I first came across the diagram, this just beautiful, beautiful diagram on Wikipedia that kind of inspired this whole project, which we can kind of get into.
Yeah, yeah, it would be fun to see that diagram, to see what kickstarted you and what got you going in that direction.
Mm.
So so that we know what language to use while we're talking to each other, how familiar are you with folks like John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot and Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, actually, it's folks like that are who introduced me to your channel, and your work and the other discussions that you've been having in this kind of space, in this little corner, which I'm a kind of lurker in, an aspiring participant, and this is kind of my first step into that, and so I appreciate your hand holding on the way. But oh man, yeah, Viveki in particular, I've been a deep fan of for a long while now. That's actually what a lot of my early kind of Twitter presence was focused around, was like sharing my notes and my diagrams and my takes on a lot of his content, which I've found life enriching and transformative and just so fascinating, and I could do a whole other podcast on just talking about Viveki's work and unpacking bits and pieces from that lecture series in particular. But yeah, so we can weave in bits and pieces of that. I love Peugeot as well, from the slightly less that I've seen of him. And Peterson, I have a love-hate relationship with. I really enjoyed his last conversation with John that they put up. I think he's at his best when John's in the room with him.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I love that kind of sphere of things, and it has been a kind of tangential but big influence on this like realm of music theory and patterns in reality and the intelligibility of the forms and all of that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Okay, okay. So that's helpful to kind of know when if we start riffing on this stuff. So do you want to start? Do you want to start with that first diagram that you saw on
Well,
Wikipedia?
yeah, that'd be cool. Let me see if I can share my screen here, and I will. Oh, so this is Windows. Let me open the tab and then I'll share it with that one. Um,
I think it might have been that diagram or something that you bounced off of on that diagram back in 2022 that first got me captivated by what you were doing.
Uh-huh, yeah. And we can get into that. I'll pull up some of those tweets from earlier on. Oh, hang on. What happened to my window here? All right, let me try and share this one. Alrighty. Let me know when you're seeing that.
I see it. Well, I see your dodecatone mega thread.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So this is like, yeah, this is a kind of, yeah, mega thread that I kind of put together on the recent kind of re-exploration into this, but it links somewhere, if I can find that, to, here we go. So this is a history thread that I put together, which right at the top here, we'll see. This is the boy. This is the guy right here. This diagram is, oh, it blew my mind, Karen. I was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about music this way. And just in one frame, I scrolled down. So this is on the Wikipedia page for pentatonic scales, I think.
Okay.
And what it is it's a visualization of the modes of a scale, which is a notoriously like confusing topic for students and something that lots of people get very, very hung up on. But you can get an immediate sense by looking at this diagram for what they are. So
So
we've got
it's
these
kind of like
seven kind of,
Venn diagrams for the
yeah, in a
triads
lot
of
of ways. And so,
connection.
uh-huh.
Yeah, wow,
And
that's
that,
super
sorry, I didn't mean to cut
interesting.
you off. It's amazing, isn't it? And so that's like even another level on top. So there's a couple things here. One is this way of representing musical patterns by using shapes like this, which if you're, yeah, it can be a little opaque at first, but it's quite
So the
simple,
shapes
and
are
you'll
in
see it when we
the
play around.
shapes have meaning to them then.
Absolutely. Each
Okay.
side of these shapes encodes meaning about the distance between the notes that we're including in it. So can I draw on the screen? I think I can annotate, right? Can you see this?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Let's go. So see this longer side here?
Uh-huh.
Um, that means that we skip a single note of our 12 notes that we use in Western music. And then here, once we come around this way, we skip another note. And so we call that a tone. If we're skipping a single note and then moving to the one after that, then we call that a tone. Whereas down here, if we're moving just a short distance and we're not skipping any notes, we're just taking a single step, then we call that a semitone.
Now, when you're
And that's
talking about
all it
notes,
is.
you're talking about the 12 notes of the piano scale?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so we're kind of going a little out of order here. And if I was like teaching a class or something, then yeah, we'd start with what is 12 tone equal temperament, which is the system we're using here, which
Hmm.
it's relatively simple. There's lots of details under the hood, but it's that we take an octave, which again, okay, so we'd have to explain what that is, but take for granted we know what an octave is. That's like C to C on a piano. And in between those two Cs, we split the frequencies into 12 equally spaced frequencies. So every note is the same distance from the previous note and the next note. If we're talking about frequency ratios, which is the kind of the kink in that theory, because it's not actually the same number of hertz higher or lower. It's about the multiples between the notes. And so we can get into those details later. But the long and short of it is we've got 12 notes that are totally equally spaced, and we're just picking out of those 12 notes which ones we're going to use in whatever pattern that we're thinking of.
So
And
on the
so,
Ionian,
yeah,
you're skipping, and then you're not skipping, and then you're
yeah.
skipping, and then not skipping.
That's exactly right. And so
Okay.
that's tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That's Da 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 do re mi fa sol la ti do. That's a normal major scale. Another name for that is Ionian. Um, and so that's why I've got a 1 here. And so yeah, immediately I noticed this and I was like, oh my goodness, I've never ever seen musical patterns represented this way, where just immediately you see the shape and you can decode from it exactly what steps you need to take to create that pattern on the piano, and it blew my mind. Because then what you can also do, which is what this diagram does so beautifully, is show the modes of this scale, which um you can get an immediate sense for what they are with this diagram, which is they're simply rotations of that same shape. So if you see this Dorian here, can I clear the, oh, there we go, Control Z. So see this Dorian, if we start it from this point, we get that same pattern. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 and semitone. It's the same thing as this one over here, but it's rotated. And so what we actually get is the pattern starting from this point, which is tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, and tone at the end. So all we've done is we've taken that first tone that we started at Ionian and we've put it at the end so that now we're actually starting at this next point around. And this is what becomes pretty clear in dodecatone once you see them actually rotating around. And so each step along here is simply the next rotation, so that the next point along becomes the top point, and that gives you this variation in the pattern where the intervals and the order of intervals is exactly the same. It's just starting from a different point along that sequence.
So
So that's
the
what a mode of a
Ionian,
scale
the
is.
Ionian, Dorian, and Phrygian are all the same shape.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay,
And it's a
but
little
the
hard to
other
see at
four are
first.
the other four are different.
Actually, no,
No,
they are further
Locrian is the same.
rotations that continue all the way around. And so yeah, at first all these shapes can be a little bit opaque, but once you get to recognize, so the way that I like to think of it is by looking at Dorian and looking at this point of symmetry here, where then you've got your semitones either side, and then your 2 tones on top and your 3 tones on the bottom. To me, it looks like a little house, or maybe like a cruise ship from the front or something, where it's like
Hmm.
there's a boat coming at you. Like there's various ways of kind of conceptualizing it. If you can get that pattern like in your head, then you can start to see that if you just tilt your head this way, then Phrygian is that same pattern but rotated around. Oh, that's a terrible line. But then, and then Locrian, so I could go through and draw the points of symmetry on all of these.
But the Mixolydian is different, isn't it? Oh no, it's not.
Yeah, you see.
Oh my goodness, it's so weird because when you're looking at it,
Uh-huh.
it's just hard to see until you do that.
And then your
Like,
brain clicks into place and you go, oh my gosh, it's the
yeah,
same
yeah, yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And that's exactly what's so cool about this method of
Now,
representing the
now
shapes and what blew my mind.
the first time you saw this diagram, did you notice right away that they were all the same shape?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know that they're all the same shape. And so this is a topic in music theory that for a long time I've been trying to figure out how the heck to explain it to people, because it crushes their brain every time for some reason. I think part of the issue is that there's multiple ways. There's 2 ways you can go into explaining modes. One is by using rotations like this, but then another one is by moving a single point on the shape, which is equivalent to rotating it. And so this is all like details, but yeah, so when I looked at this, I was like, oh my goodness, like for me, I could just immediately see like the fact that these are just rotations of each other, and there's this lovely symmetry with the way that they're laid out. Even if you draw a line all the way down the middle, then this whole thing is symmetrical on one side and the other side. Um, and not only that, and so this was the first thing I noticed was, oh my gosh, like representing patterns as shapes, that's so cool. But then, as you pointed out, there was this thing of how we've got the all the blues in all the pentatonic scales like laid over the top as well, which I was like, oh my goodness, like I wish I had this when I was studying jazz, because they were trying to teach us which. So what this demonstrates is if we're playing in an Ionian scale, then we can use either the major or the blues major scale over the top of that, and it will have consonant notes. All the notes will fit nicely on top of that other scale. And the same here. And so any overlap, like this Venn diagram kind of set up here, so a suspended pentatonic scale can fit over a Dorian or a Mixolydian or an Aeolian. And so there's this other level of like encoded information here where we've got both the major scales and the blues and the pentatonic scales,
Well, the
which,
reason it's kind of mind-blowing for me is it's very reminiscent of what is happening with the DNA code. Um, because the
yeah,
reason the DNA code is so flexible is that it depends on where you start with the codons as to what information is being transmitted.
that is a that's a really fascinating link, Karen. Like, and I think it could sound like out there to some people, but I think there is a lot of consonants there, and I think, and we're on the same page here. Like
Well,
John's talked a
I
lot
don't know if
about
you
like the
happen to,
musicality of intelligibility and all of that
yeah.
stuff.
Did you happen to see the video that I did with Richard A. Watson from Southampton University in England?
No, I haven't. I'd
He
love
he
to see
did
that.
this whole he did a series of 5 videos explaining his theory of life as a song. It's very
Oh, that sounds
detailed.
right up my alley.
Yeah, and it's right down to the basics of developmental biology and
Mm.
why he feels that natural selection is not a good enough mechanism for Darwinian evolution. And so he's looking at something he calls natural induction. And he
Wow, I would love a link to that.
uses these very complex mechanisms like um, viscoelastic connections that give way just a little bit and then come back, which is, very
Yeah.
similar to the resonance in strings and things like that. So it's this fascinating series that he did. It's very, I mean, I don't know if he's right or not, but it's a beautiful concept to mull over, right? And then I had a conversation with him about it, but it was impossible in one talk to dig into 7.5 hours of his theory. So I'll link to his theory in the description section for people who want to listen to it.
That sounds fantastic, me included. Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Um, yeah, I think there are so many parallels, and the obvious ones are in physics. Like it's all about resonances and rotations of certain patterns and shapes and all sorts of like homologous morphisms and it's there's so much there that I think, yeah, that I think that this a lot of this kind of can point to in interesting ways and can even help with the learning of, like, I've got this kind of whole other tangent around re-emphasizing music as an educational tool, and we do it in this kind of haphazard and like almost embarrassed way where, oh yeah, I like learnt this little song and it helps me remember the French words, or and but it's still kind of weird and wacky and oh, you should probably just rote memorize it, bro. Like, what are you doing with that stuff? That's kids stuff. Like, there's this kind of complex around like, but I really do think that like using using music as a way um to represent and to understand and to memorize a lot of these heady kind of, especially like physics concepts, um, I think could do a lot this century if we like kind of tapped into that properly. And so that's a whole other kind of realm of things that I think is really fascinating. But yeah, so this is a kind of intro to this like first diagram that inspired this whole thing. Uh, there's one other kind of layer to it, which is a little hard to kind of explain, but it's this idea that you can also move through, you know how I said before, the modes are notoriously confusing because there are kind of two different ways to get to them. And a lot of students don't know how they fit together very well. Both of them are represented really neatly in this graph, and it does take more explanation to kind of fully see it, but I can draw the lines for you, which is you can go this way. So you're walking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that's called the diatonic direction, I suppose. That's stepping through each mode by rotating it one at a time. And then you could also go this way, which is a different way of moving through the modes where each step you take, you're changing a single note and all the other notes are staying the same. What I'd like to do is make a proper visual representation of these two kind of ways of moving through it, because it's still a little opaque when I just explain it like that. But that was then the third thing that jumped out to me about this incredible graphic, that not only are the individual shapes packed with information, but the way they're arranged and the way they're related and overlapped also just encode all this stuff. And it's just very, 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 very cool. So I went on a big tangent after coming across this one, and my kind of first instinct was to try and draw a bunch of other shapes and see, okay, well, what about this other scale that I know about? Like, what does that look like if I use different length sides on a polygon to represent the intervals within that shape? And so I ended up kind of slowly building up this well, you call it a compendium of musical shapes, which is kind of where I'm working towards still to this day. So I can try and show you that if I can get this annotate thing away. Here we go. So I'll just briefly scroll through this, but maybe we can put a link to this history thread that I gave in the description if people are interested.
Perfect.
But what first kind of jumped out to me was that, well, we can make these, and these are terrible drawings, this was early stages, but we can make these regular shapes by just using a single interval, a single size of stepping through the notes, and you get this kind of core group of 6 patterns, which each correspond to an actual, I mean, all of them do. They correspond to an actual pattern that is used all the time within music theory and within composition and improvisation and stuff. So what we've got here are the chromatic scale, which is just every single note on the piano. So that's all 12 notes. And each step here is just one semitone. And so that's da 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 da. That wasn't very in tune, but you get the idea. And so that's not very exciting. That's kind of cool, but why can't I get rid of this last annotation? Hang on. Do I right click on it? Oh gosh, I should have practiced this a bit. If I close that, does it delete it? No, it doesn't. There we go. Okay. And so then, so that's every single note, and that tells you like what we've got access to, what we can pick from here. But then if we go to our next regular shape, where each time we're taking a single step over a note that we're skipping. So we're stepping over this black note and skipping from C to D, and then from D to E, and then over F. So this gives us our whole tone scale. So that's da 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 da. I'd love to try and play piano for you instead of attempting to sing it, but we had a bit of trouble getting that to play through. So I'm afraid you're gonna have to sit through this for now. So that's our whole tone scale. And the thing with that is there's actually two whole tone scales, because we could start on this note and we get an entirely different pattern, which is made up of all the ones we skipped the first time around. So you've got one chromatic scale and two different whole tone scales. And then if we go to our next one, this is a diminished seventh chord, a fully diminished chord, which, so each time we're skipping two notes, so these two here, we're skipping over and skipping over, and we get a diminished chord that sounds like da, 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 da. And we use that all the time in jazz in particular, and it's very useful for moving between keys and doing transitions and stuff. And so you can continue this process. You get a triangle, which is our augmented chord. That's when we skip three and then skip three and then skip three again. And then you can also get this guy, which is my favorite and the kind of coolest looking one there. That's a dodecagram, if you want the technical name. And what this one does is it skips through every single note, but in this pattern where you're kind of jumping around the circle by 5 at a time. And so it ends up touching every single note on the piano, but in a different order than how we do it when we're just doing it chromatically. And this gives you what is called commonly the circle of fifths, or the circle of fourths, or the cycle of fifths, or the cycle of, there's various ways of calling it, which kind of has annoyed me that there isn't just a standardized way of naming it. But
Well,
it's a
that
circle
that
or
was the one
cycle
that
of fifths or
fascinated me
fourths.
because it's so similar to the color wheel. And it's very
Yeah,
similar to color theory in terms of how
yeah,
colors will work together.
exact. And we can definitely get into that kind of thing, especially when I pull dodecatone up and I have actually got the different notes color coded according to a rainbow, and it makes, yeah, it's very satisfying. So anyway, so this is, we could dig into all of this and how they're used and what they mean, but these shapes here that just use a single interval are kind of like, they're kind of like the fundamental particles for me of the of music theory, of 12 tone equal temperament music theory. And so they like all other scales and shapes and patterns are made up of some sections of some of these all mushed together in interesting ways. And that's where I ended up kind of going next, which was um to kind of continue working through and figuring out like what other shapes have we got. And so then we get the two that we originally saw, which is our normal major scale and then our pentatonic scale, which were on that original diagram. But then this one is a melodic minor scale, which has a flattened third, da, 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 da. And you can do this for any shape that you can think of that you can play into on a piano. You can draw on a circle, which I think, yeah, is quite cool and gives you access to a lot of kind of ways of seeing these patterns that otherwise would be difficult.
So wait,
Not least
the
this.
circle on the right is the same set of notes. It's just drawn on the other end of the scale.
Aha. So
Okay.
yeah, we can get into that, which is that yeah, this is the transformation here. The transformations here are between the chromatic circle, which is just every single note in the order that it shows up on the piano, da, 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 da. And then the circle of fifths, which is this other one that we can talk about a bit more, which tells you, how did I put it in my article? It tells you how harmonically close notes are. whereas the first one tells you how melodically close those notes are. That's kind of a framing that I'm working on, which I think is quite justifiable. But yeah, that's one way of putting it. But we can kind of get into when again once I've got dodecatone open.
Well,
And so
while we're
yeah,
on that, before we lose that thought,
mm,
I think there's also something in DNA where whether it's read forward or backward makes a difference in the message. So it
I
can be
bet,
read
yeah.
both ways, but give a different message each way. And that's
Hmm.
basically what you're doing there is you're reading it backwards because you're drawing, you're transforming from the one shape to the other shape by taking the earlier part of the shape and putting it over, flopping it over onto
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
forward
yeah.
progress. So
So
it's like a reversal of sorts.
yeah, it's because it's interesting because it's not exactly that. Like we haven't just
Yeah,
flipped the whole thing
yeah.
around, but we've taken every second. This is what it is you take every second note and you rotate it 180 degrees. And so you get this kind of like folded in on itself shape, which is really interesting, which
Well,
I'm sure
see,
there's
but
lots of like
it
protein
may be
folding
it
stuff
may
that
be
that
a
might
lot
apply
of,
to.
when they look at DNA and they say so much of it is junk DNA, it may be because they haven't yet discovered that there is a way like that to read it,
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
take every
Yeah.
second codon and flip it backwards. I mean, there's all these transformations that could be made that they haven't
You're
made
so
yet,
right. I
right?
would put money on the fact that junk DNA is a junk concept. um so yeah, so I could go through the rest of this thread. I ended up kind of putting together these little cardboard versions, which meant that I could actually like sit and rotate them around, which is one of the biggest benefits of this method is that you can do these rotations, which corresponds to either changing the mode of the scale or changing the key of the scale, depending on how you do it. And but they're actually kind of the same thing as well. And so that's the stuff that you kind of get from this. Um, this is a demonstration of the like that transformation we were just talking about. So like this is a chromatic circle, right? So from C, we just go straight up to D flat, and then from D flat to D. Like this is just stepping through one semitone at a time. But if we look at the and I didn't rotate the thing, so the text ends up upside down. But this is the circle of fifths, and so this is the same set of notes, but one of them has been rotated around 180 degrees. So these are the like two pieces of that thing, and so you take one of them and you rotate it around, and then you get this pattern of fifths, which is a cool way to think about it, and something that until coming across this, I had never really fully wrapped my brain around like why is the circle of fifths this like important thing and like how do we actually get to it and so yeah I could dig into that some more and then on and on and on and on the probably the peak of my kind of obsession was building this contraption which was like two pieces of paper that you could like slide over one another and um and get the different modes and versions of the shape. So like this is starting on D and then this one's starting on D flat. And so like I cut out all these little holes and then had this quite autistic of me, but in a good way. And so then we get to this guy, which is I think we'll see if I can find the link, your original response to my tweet, which was amazing and so encouraging to have like 20 followers or something at this point and get a response from someone on a podcast that I admire and listen to regularly. And so I had posted this back in 2022, which is um these kind of digitized versions of the shapes that I was making. I got kind of sick of cutting out bits of paper and started turning them into these digital ones. And then started kind of trying to pull together this like compendium of different shapes within music, and this is kind of where I got to with that part of the project, and then Dodecatone is a continuation of that. So I've rambled for a while there, but yeah,
Didn't sound
that's
like
a bit of
rambling to
context
me.
setting.
It's all completely fascinating. You can keep talking
Well,
if
thank
you
you.
want to.
Well, thank
But
you,
let's just
thank
scroll
you.
down at this comment that I made because I don't even know how I thought of that. It's really
Mm,
crazy that the whole
mm,
tone represents the basic color wheel. The diminished, augmented, and cadential represent various color strategies. Yeah, limited palettes, which enhance color
mm-hmm,
harmony in the finished work. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
exactly. That's the way it works.
Yeah, and you're bang on. Like, and again, once we get back to here, then we can start to see, like, from the beginning I was like, well, yeah, obviously we're gonna put a rainbow on the notes because it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. And so you get that kind of that coming to fruition here, and then what you get, I've just paused it, it's kind of squished here, I'll stop it here, is if you color code, you've got kind of a couple choices. You could either color code them in a rainbow pattern chromatically. So C would be red, and then D flat would be the orange one, and then D
Mhm.
would be yellow, and then, or, which I prefer, color coding them in the fifths/fourths pattern, which, yeah, I think is more kind of consonant with, well, with the consonants of the of the notes, in that C and G work really nice together, and red and orange are like very close in wavelength. And so you get this cool thing where when you do the transformation back from the chromatic circle, which looks a little bit out of order, but then you put it into fifths and it all suddenly snaps into this beautiful rainbow. And you're a
Well,
big
okay, so
inspiration for
that
making sure that was included.
in terms of color theory, the way you've got it set up with the circle of fifths being the color wheel, um,
Mm.
then when you go into this format that you've got right now, if you take what we would call a split complement palette, would be the one at the top of the color wheel and then the one on either side of the one at the bottom of the color wheel. So what you've got here now, you've got C, F, and G as your chords, which is, would make a song, but those are just the colors that are next to each other in the color wheel. But what happens if you switch this back out now to make the color wheel chromatic instead of the circle of fifths chromatic?
Well, what you would get is that,
Can you
so
do
right.
that? Is that possible to do in the app?
Currently, I mean, I could muck around with the code a little bit, and we could see what it looks like, but I can tell you what it would look like is that simply it would be this same sequence of colors. So like red, and then this blue, and then this yellow, and then this purple, but the notes would be the in the other order. So it would look the same as this, but like G would be here and F would be here, and so F would be green and G would be blue. um so it'd be the total and this is something I'd love to include in the app. Something that I've been meaning to add as a little toggle somewhere where you can apply the colors in either direction.
Well, I mean, if you
So good
did
chat.
that, then what you would end up with is your color strategies would be next to each other on the color wheel. So the C, F, and G, the red, the green, and the blue, that is a perfect color strategy because that's a split
Yeah.
complement. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, but
I'm
ordinarily when
fascinated
artists,
by this split complement idea because I think, yeah, it lines up exactly with the idea of fourths and fifths on the circle.
yeah, exactly. So that's why in my mind, I think of the color wheel as being chromatic all the way around so that you know which color is next to which color and then which color is opposite so that you can look at the
Mm,
complement as being opposite on the other
mm,
side of the wheel and you can find your split complements that way. But that's why that cadential wheel is so nice because that's made up of split complements all the way around in terms of the
yeah, yeah.
color. But then you'd have to see if that actually works out in terms of harmonics.
Well, no, and it totally does, and that's the coolest thing about this. So that cadential, like star-shaped pattern,
Mm-hmm.
that is the same pattern as this. That is the circle of fifths. So if we're going from C to F, and then from F to B flat, and then from B flat to E flat. So if we kept going around, we'd get this full kind of star pattern, right? But then if we switched the order, which I think I do in this GIF at some point in a sec. Yeah, then now that same pattern, that star-shaped pattern, if we were to step through the same notes, it's just walking around the circle. So now we're going C to G to A, or what we did last time was C to F, so we went around this way, C to F, F to B flat. So once we've switched the order of notes, then that star pattern becomes the dodecagon pattern, which is just walking around. And then what that means is that if we were to move chromatically, then now that we're in this layout, we get that star pattern again. So C to D flat to D to E flat to E to F, etc. So as we switch between the chromatic layout and the fifths or fourths, fourths is just the mirror image of fifths, so you can do either. The dodecagon becomes a dodecagram, and I can show you this. It looks very, very cool. It's probably about time I actually open the app. Hey, so can you see? Oh, whoops. Oh, my bar is at the top and I can't click my tabs. How do I do that?
You kind of have to stop share and then go back and choose your screen again and reshare.
Oh, yeah, actually. Oh, so you can't see Dodecatone right now?
I can now, yes. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. So you can see me like pressing
Yeah,
buttons and stuff on
yeah.
here now. Okay, awesome, awesome. All right, so then, yeah, so this is what I'm explaining here is that if we take our chromatic shape, so this is C to D flat, so this is just walking up the steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we transform from this layout to the fifth layout, then, and this animation is very cool. Watch this. Whoa. Now suddenly we've got our beautiful dodecagram. And that flips around and then it goes back. And so that's our chromatic scale. And so you can see like we've swapped the order of notes, but if we're still following that same chromatic pattern, then we go from C to D flat, C to D flat, and then D flat to D, that's D flat to D, etc., etc., etc. Same can be done for, so if we switch it back to chromatic, oops, hang
So
on.
before you move on, could I just ask you a question? Because I'm not super good at music theory, but I played and I when I was in my 50s, I taught myself to play piano based on guitar chords. And so
Incredible.
I have a general idea of what makes a song. You need a
Yeah.
1 4 5 and then maybe a minor sixth and a minor second and a suspended in there. There's a few things to make it into a song. But so
Yeah,
it
totally.
looks to me then like every three chords on this circle would make a song. You could have a CFG song, or you could have,
Yeah,
right? You could have a GDA song or an AEB song. Is that correct?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's why the circle of fifths is so useful because when we expand it and we're not just looking at a stack of individual notes, but we take the chords for each, so like a C major chord and then an F major chord and a G major chord, adjacent chords work very nicely together. The further around the circle you get, the more far away from home we're getting. So if we went from a C chord right across to a G flat chord, then it would be a little bit like, whoa, we've gone somewhere totally new, like we're in a different space now. Whereas going from a C to an F chord, they sound like they're good friends or something. So you're bang on there, yeah, and that's why the circle of fifths is so cool and so useful. And you can see some of these patterns kind of start to come out by using this tool, which is part of the point of it.
Well, so
Um,
see, one of the reasons I would like to and maybe you can make me a page on your app
Yeah, I'd
where
love to.
where you have this circle, but instead of the circle of fifths, it's the circle of all the notes in the scale.
Yeah. Oh,
But
Karen,
but
you're two
but
steps
in these
ahead.
but in these colors. So it would go
Absolutely.
C, D flat, D, it would go around in the circle with these colors. Then I'd be able
Uh-huh.
to look at the split complement from the C, and then what's opposite the C at the bottom would be, what would be opposite the C if it were in a scale? Um,
Yeah, well, depends. So, do you mean so like because this is what I think you mean, and something I definitely want to do, which is to
would it be an F? I think it would be an F, wouldn't it?
the issue is that I think so. If we're talking about restricting ourselves to just the notes from a C major scale, um, and making a circle that has 7 points around it that include just those 7 notes of the major scale,
Uh,
then there wouldn't be anything directly opposite that C, but it would be the G and the F that were the split complements either side.
okay, so you could do a scale like that, but I was just thinking of putting the whole 12 tone circle in there because on music theory there are 12 colors that, I mean, obviously there's 256 million colors, but
Yeah,
to limit it for music theory, we typically think of the 12 colors, the
absolutely.
uh the three, um the triad, the basic triad, and then the alternate triad, which would be purple, orange, and green, and um then all the off colors that are in between, like yellow, green, and so like the
Mm.
complement of red, violet would be yellow, green. So it'd be opposite and on the color wheel.
Yeah, and so what that would correspond to is what we call a tritone, which is just directly across the circle. And if you step through these, then you get this nice kind of opposing complementary color. So we've got D and A flat, which is this like blue and yellow,
Right. So the
and
split
then
complement is the only one that makes sense musically then. The
Mm,
split complement gives you, well, I mean, if you go
yeah,
back,
to a degree, it's the most consonant of any of the musical shapes would be, and I think I can find that would be this guy.
yeah.
Yeah, split complement.
Well, and so in
Um,
music theory, you can do the split complement. You can also do like you showed the cube, the four, um,
hmm
what is that called? The
This is a
diminished.
diminished chord. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
you can
yeah.
also do that in color theory. That's a
Uh-huh.
potential palette. You can do strictly complementary though. In you can make a painting out of just those two colors, the complements. But
The
guess what
opposing
happens
ones?
if you're working with two complements and that's the only colors that you have? Let's say red and green, like Christmas, right? Red and green are
Mm,
complements. So if you're
mm,
using just those two, um, what you get is in between, you get a shaded scale of semi-neutrals. So you have the two bright notes, and then
yeah.
as you keep adding little bits of it all the way through, you get all these semi-neutrals in the middle. So
hmm
it makes a very interesting palette, but it's not used typically to make happy paintings, or
Yeah.
it's used for, more of a mood kind of a painting, or more of a um, kind of retro look or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Like almost a dissonance.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
where the colors play off against each other in this interesting way. But people, I think people can they can overstate the rigidity of these relationships sometimes in
Hmm.
like, and people will say, oh, a tritone is like really dissonant and it always sounds like bad to your ear or something. It's not true. It's not true at all. Like, we use tritones all the time in beautiful, sweet, lovely music, but it's about the context and the way that we're using them, and the way that there is tension in a tritone, like those notes rub against each other, but that's the spice of life, baby. Like we take that tension and then we release it, and then that gives you this like feeling of satisfaction. And so without that tension, then you couldn't get that kind of feeling of beauty and love. And like so it's always about the context. And I think this, again, the same thing can be said for color, for like color theory, where like you could say, oh, these two colors clash with each other. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe if you just paint them in blocks next to each other, it's a little hard on the eyes. But if you put it in this right context and it fits the mood and the content of the painting and da 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 da, then
Mhm.
you can use it to your advantage, that
Yes,
kind of dissonance that arises.
exactly. That's exactly right.
Mm, And so there's so many parallels here, and there are other people talking about this kind of stuff, about the like links between sound and color and the interesting kind of parallels there. Again, sometimes I think people can overstate it, and they can kind of confirmation bias themselves into erasing all the real and interesting differences between our perception of color and our perception of sound. Like
Hmm.
even just the biological differences of the fact that we've got basically three receptors for color, but like 400 receptors for sound, and that has this interesting kind of way of, and then we've got, stereoscopic vision, but that's has a different effect than stereo sound, and like there's so many crossovers and links. But then I think it's also really interesting to talk about how they're different and what makes them different. Um, and so I'd love to, yeah, I love that I'm kind of getting into this space where I can hopefully kind of riff with some more people about stuff like this. Yeah. So, um, all this being said, like this is still a very kind of early prototype of the app that I want to build and wish existed in the world. And part of that is due to the fact that I didn't, most of the code of this was not typed out by me. It was typed out by my dear friend Claude Sonnet 3.5, um, who has been a great help in this project. And I couldn't have ever gotten it to this point without the use of like LLMs. And particularly since I recently got this brilliant code editor program called Cursor that embeds the AI into the window, so you don't have to switch tabs and copy and then switch back and paste and then switch back and type, and then, which was taking up a lot of my time in the early stages of this. And so it's been really, really, really useful, but also it is not without its limitations. And so it's gotten to a point where the code base is borderline unmaintainable, and my possible next step, if I can get some guidance or direct kind of hands-on help with pretty much fully building it again from the ground up, but like actually putting a bit of thought into the way that it's structured, because there are just lots and lots of little band-aids over the code that's like, oh, this didn't quite work, let's add a function to fix that. But then later when I'm trying to add this other feature, then the band-aid I put on means that breaks, and so it's a little bit of spaghetti code at the moment. And so part of what I'm hoping kind of getting out there and talking about it some more will do is catch the attention of someone who has the skills that I lack, and could and the interest and enthusiasm for the project, to be able to kind of, yeah, give me some guidance, or hopefully even actively like partner with me to build the next version. So if anyone's out there, if you know anyone, Karen, then I'm very, very open to that. This is all going to be open source. I've got a GitHub page. We can link it in the description. And so I'm really keen to kind of get a bit of a community happening to continue work on this thing.
Well, so what is your end goal for this project? Or
Ain't that the question?
I mean,
When does it stop?
to what use do you want to put it?
Mm, mm. Yeah, well, to yeah, I should have kind of, yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and there's many ways I could pitch it, but I
Well,
think
you start with one, and then you can always
Yeah,
cycle through all of
exactly.
the
Yeah.
ideas, right? So
Yeah. Um, Broadly, what this is evolving into, and what it kind of has been from the beginning, as you saw with that big chart of all the shapes that I could think of to include and stuff. This is part of something I haven't really talked about a lot publicly yet, but it's something I'd like to do more, which is kind of flesh out and pitch this idea of the Kompendium project, which is this kind of broader thing that I can't explain properly, but I've thought so much about, and we could do a whole other podcast on it. But broadly, it's this kind of um, goal to pull together a bunch of resources and make them accessible and interactive and adaptable and updatable all in one space. Um, and this applies in all realms. I've been working on like a physics compendium, and then John Viveki has been instrumental in my like meaning and cognitive science compendium thing that I'm kind of building. But where I want to start with this is where my actual area of expertise is, which is not in physics or in cognitive science, but in music. And so the moonshot idea is that eventually this interactive web app will have the full features that I want to add to it, which you can see on my GitHub if you want to see kind of some of the stuff that I plan to add. But basic stuff like I want to have MIDI input, I want to have sound font choices, change it so you make it sound like a piano or a guitar or whatever. Like basic stuff. I want to mobile optimize it. Or there's all that, but then the kind of moonshot goal is to then somehow incorporate and link it in with a series of like articles, like a wiki, um, that would there'd be a page for each pattern that you can pick out of this menu, and it would kind of give you some history and some context and where that pattern is used and what like sub patterns you can find within the pattern and ways that you can construct it and stuff like that. So yeah, and it sounds really ambitious because it is. But
well, it
all
sounds
good things are
super exciting to
ambitious.
me because I can imagine my own wiki on there for the big idea that's inside my head that I can't figure out how to visualize. But if I could figure out how to visualize it, one of these would be just dandy
Yeah.
for it because you could you could think in terms of, well, what if we had this much, you have these 8 principles of art. What if you had 5% of this principle and 83% of that principle? And you know, you could
Mm.
you could create these little webs that would show the spatial relationships of all these, how these principles would relate in space instead of just relating in your thought process as you're painting. It's
Oh
like you
man,
said, it's very hard to
you're
put these
speaking my
things into words.
language. You
But
are speaking my language.
so that would be fun. But I was also thinking, I don't know if you've heard any of the episodes I've done with Mark Jeffrey, who has been kind of chronicling Wolfram's theory of physics. And Mark Jeffrey's channel is called The Last Theory because he says if Wolfram is right, it's the last theory of physics we'll ever need. But Mark is also working on a
Oh,
thing that I think is called Open Web Mind, which is kind of an alternative to all of the search engines and AI and everything that's out there, all of the social media. It's an alternative to all of that as a
mm,
new way of organizing human information.
wow.
Um,
That sounds right up my alley as well.
yeah. So he's going to be on soon to discuss updates because 2 or 3 years ago when I had him on, it was just a conceptual thing in his head. And now he's actually ready to launch. Um,
That's
but that might
incredible.
be a useful platform for things like this, a place where
Hmm.
you could explore these things if he has enough of a um if the platform is user friendly enough to where you could input these ideas and get them to populate. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I don't know exactly what he has in mind. He's going to talk about it more, but
I'll write that one down and definitely check out that podcast um in the interim and yeah, I'm really fascinated to see the next one that comes out because that sounds like something that is really close to the ideas that I've got around this compendium project thing, which yeah, I'd love to kind of talk some more about. I had a bit of a flurry of note taking and brainstorming even last night that I think is starting to kind of pull together a coherent concept of what this thing is that I want to build. And I know that a lot of people are working on kind of adjacent and convergent things in various spaces, and it's hard to keep track of. But that's why it's great to have outlets like this where people can really kind of expound on their approach and their goals and all of that stuff. So yeah, really keen to check that one out. I'd love what was the name of that guy again? I've written The Last Theory.
yeah, his name is Mark Jeffrey, Jeffery. Really brilliant mind, but
Awesome.
also able to simplify things and make them very accessible.
Oh,
Um,
great.
but the reason I think your idea about this compendium is so cool is that um, modern physics tends to think there's no there, that everything is just particles and it's all, out there in the
Who's looking at the particles then, bro?
but but if we are onto something with all these different kind of things that are in our mind, each person has a different vision of what this is. You're looking at it through music, I'm looking at it through art, somebody else might be looking at it through mathematics, another person might be looking at it through developmental biology. We're all seeing something, and if there's a way to bring all of these things together and play with them a little bit and look at them, you might begin to get a picture of what the there is that's there.
Yeah,
Because we're all looking at
yeah.
something, and I think we may all be looking at the same thing.
We're all pointing at the moon.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I so think that's so, yeah. And again, it seems kind of esoteric and like, what has music got to do with biology? But it's got everything to do with it, bro. Like, and there's
Yeah,
so
well, so
many convergences
today
and
I had a great conversation with Benjamin Lyons and Marcus Schira, who are both in the economics realm, and we were looking at Austrian economics. And the reason is that Benjamin Lyons has been working with Michael Levin on the whole issue of how economics and biology line up
yeah.
like that, right?
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so all these things are starting to come together, and your compendium would be such a great place to explore that.
Oh man. Well, yeah. Well, I appreciate the kind of the encouragement and it's motivating for me to kind of get out there and kind of discuss and explain and evolve and adapt this idea some more and hopefully kind of get something actually tangible happening with it beyond just this thing that haunts my brain that I just wish existed in the world. Because
So
I've
you
done a
need
bit of writing about it on Twitter, but yeah.
somebody with actual coding skills, right?
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
that would be ideal is and specifically for dodecatone because I think this is my foot in the door there. Again, it's my area of expertise and it's the thing that um that I'm personally most passionate about. But I think it fits into this broader thing, and that by developing dodecatone to the level that I want to, it kind of opens the door to like, well, what does the physics version of this look like, and what does the visual art version look like? Um, and so ideally, if anyone out there has coding experience, but is also relatively familiar with like music theory, just the basic concepts of octaves and intervals and like high school level music theory basically. It doesn't have to you don't have to go to college and do musicology with Riemannian Tonetz grids or anything, but just a basic familiarity plus the kind of experience specifically with web development. With what I've been using for this is JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Which some people are like, whoa, how did you like? I didn't know that you could do something this kind of complex with that. It's like, yeah, Java is a powerful language. JavaScript's a really, really powerful language and a big and complicated and hard to kind of understand language that I would appreciate some hand holding in. So yeah, absolutely. I'd love anyone out there who's fascinated by this to reach out on Twitter or yeah, on Twitter is probably the best place. Or I guess I could maybe give my email in the thing. We'll figure out. There'll be some way to contact me if you're keen to chat.
Well, and
So
I'll think through the people that have already been on here in the past that are coders.
that will be amazing, Karen.
And
Thank
I
you.
could connect you to them by email.
That would be so cool. That would
Yeah.
be so cool. Because I've been kind of haphazardly reaching out to various people here and there and trying to be like, oh, do you get this? Like, is it cool? But it's hard when I don't chat with them directly and I'm not able to kind of fully like explain it, and I'm trying to condense it into like a little email that kind of, and I'm just hoping that they click it open and then kind of get the picture and go, oh, this is cool, like I did when I first saw that diagram. Like that's what I'm hoping to give to people. But part of the next big step, apart from like refactoring the entire code base, is that I want to include like a proper tutorial on the website when you first open it, and it'll pop up with a thing and say, this is dodecatone, here's how it works. Like, and so that would be really helpful for kind of sharing it further. But also, yeah, in the meantime, before I try and do any of that, I'd love to kind of simplify, restructure, and rebuild from the ground up the kind of code base and stuff. And so I'd love any help with that. If anyone there can help me, please. Thank you.
That's really cool. And it sounds like we also need to do a conversation on John Vervaeke in the future, because you said you've
Oh.
systematized some of his work.
Yeah, I would love to, Karen. I would really love to.
And I'm also thinking that it would be fun. Have you seen any of the episodes I've done with Neil deGrade or with Drew's Ecology about music?
Drew's Ecology sounds familiar. I don't know about the other one.
Neil deGrade is the guy behind Dirt Poor Robins, which is a musical group.
Oh.
And they also do movies. Super interesting
Incredible.
guy.
I love, yeah, I'd love to kind of
Maybe I
get
could
in
put the
touch with
three of
more
you to,
artsy, creative people.
well, maybe I could just have a conversation between among the three of you,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
would be super fun. I don't know how much you could actually hammer out in an hour and a half, because everybody would be talking at the same time.
Yeah,
But there
exactly.
would
We
be a
need to
lot of
make it a series.
enthusiasm anyway.
We need to make it a series.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I've got a lot of like little notes here that I definitely want to follow up on and listen to some of your conversations with some other people. And I'd be so keen to do more on whatever, on the Kompendium stuff, on the Vervaeke stuff, or further digging into this kind of dodecatone stuff, maybe at the next kind of up like checkpoint, once I've updated it a bit and it's got some more kind of explanation and interaction, then we could do a follow-up on this. And I've probably, hopefully by then I've like refined my script and my explanation of it a little bit better.
Well,
Because
that
it
would be
felt a bit
terrific.
waffly today, but yeah.
Yeah, so if you keep me updated, I mean, if you let me know when you're ready with an update, we can do that. In the meantime,
Hmm.
maybe we can try to get something scheduled for November or December, where we could do
Awesome.
this
Yeah.
Vervaeke conversation.
Yeah, great.
And Jordan Peterson had a conversation with a music theory guy a couple of years ago. And he's actually the one who has done the music class for the Peterson Academy. So I can check there to remember his name. because
Mm-hmm.
the Peterson Academy now has all their trailers up for the different classes that are being offered. And
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so close to joining to see John's class on, I think, ritual or wisdom or one of the things.
yeah, I'm very close to joining too. I've got some other financial obligations right now that are preventing me, but I might.
Yeah.
They just opened it up for monthly payment now, but you have to commit
Oh,
to
I
a year.
see.
You have to commit to a year, but you can pay by the month.
Right.
So that's
Mm.
getting me a little bit closer to jumping in because I'm thinking, okay, so there's 19 classes already up there and they're putting on 3 new classes every month. So in the course of a year, that would be something like 50 classes. Every class is about 8 hours long. So that's 400 hours of content for 400 and change. So that's $1 an
It's
hour
not a
for
bad
that
deal, is
quality
it? Yeah.
content. That's not a bad deal. And you know, next year they're going to double the price. I mean, you just know it,
Um,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
get in on the ground floor.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
so, and I never pay for anything. Well, I mean, I do, I pay a monthly fee to YouTube so that I don't have to watch the ads. And I pay a monthly
Yeah, me
to
too. Oh,
Zoom.
for years I've had YouTube Premium. I don't know
Yeah,
how people go without
yeah,
it.
yeah. So, but
Yeah.
most things I'm not paying for. So if I had to pay for something now and then, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So,
Hmm.
well, this has
Hmm.
been super fun. I wish we could go further, but I've got to walk the
Oh.
dogs.
Oh no, go enjoy your dog walk
Yeah,
and let some of these thoughts boil around in there.
yeah.
And I'll send you some of the links that I'd love to throw in the description. Um, and yeah, and hopefully some people will find it interesting. And
One of the
yeah,
guys that
reach
I
out to me
know
if you do.
is a coder, lives in Australia. And
Oh, there you go.
I've done several episodes with him, so you can go and do maybe search my channel. His name is Stephen Hearn, Hurn,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, and he talked a bit about how coding and art overlap. Um,
Oh yeah, they
on
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on the early the I think the first one he did on the channel. So
Mm-hmm.
he's got a very interesting mind. I think you would. So if you enjoy that episode with him, I can connect the two of you via email.
Incredible. Yeah, I will. I've got some homework to do, and then I will. I'll reach out to you and yeah, let you know what resonates and if I'd love to chat with anyone, and you do the same. Yeah, let me know if anyone comes to mind that you'd recommend me looking at,
Mhm.
or yeah, send my stuff to them if you think they'll like it, and
Right.
yeah,
And
we'll.
any links that you have that we can put in the
Mhm.
description section would be helpful too.
Yeah, I'll chuck them through on email or Twitter or somewhere. So
Okay, that sounds great.
awesome.
Thank you so much. This has been
Oh, well,
great.
thank you
Super
so much,
exciting.
Karen. Enjoy your dog walk, and hopefully we'll speak again next month or the one after.
Sounds good. Talk to you later.
Amazing. All right, see ya.